Welcome everyone to episode 5 of Office Hours with yours truly in partnership with The Loft. Today we have another stellar episode and again a different tack from the previous episodes where I was only talking to you about Fintech. Today we're welcoming Patrick Kersten and we are going to discuss about startups at large and the startup ecosystem in Luxembourg as well as innovation as opposed to only Fintech. And I think it's important for us to dive into that ecosystem and what we can do to help the state of the ecosystem and so on and so forth. So why Patrick? Because if you want to know about startups, if you want to know about innovation in Luxembourg, there's only one person and that's Patrick. Maybe Patrick, you can introduce yourself for the audience.
I've done a couple of startups here in Luxembourg, the latest being an app to book an appointment with your doctor, which is called Doctena. Prior to that, I was in the Classify in real estate with At Home. And of course also many projects which did not work out as expected. But ever since I've been around, I have been in contact with lots of founders and recently we launched an association for all the founders because there's now the ecosystem in Luxembourg has grown to over 500 startups, meaning that there's at least double as much or 3 times as much founders in Luxembourg, and meaning that if you add all the employees, we're becoming really a relevant sector. And those founders want to have a voice, and that's what the new project or the new initiative called Startups.lu is all about. We are federating the startups and trying also to have some very useful tools and services for them.
So you said 500 startups or around 500 startups in Luxembourg as of today?
That's the official numbers.
And the unofficial number is?
Startup Luxembourg, which is being supported by Lux Innovation and the Ministry of Economics, have launched a directory which is somewhere around 500 and 600.
Between 500 and 600.
And which is much more than what you can find on the internet in the international databases.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so, do we know, like 5 years ago or 10 years ago, what were the numbers? What has been the slope of like growth for these startups?
Oh, I think it has really accelerated over the last couple of years.
Yeah.
I mean, starting 2017, 18, there was a lot of initiatives like Loft or House of Startups, way back in time. I mean, incubators like the Technoport have been around for 25, 30 years. Myself, I started the first project in '96, and at the time I think we were a dozen. Not projects, but
so a dozen
founders.
At the end of the '90s to like between 500 and 600 now.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
Yeah, that's quite a growth. And in 10 years, how many?
Oh, look, I think we will hit the 1,000 within a couple of, not days, weeks, but months.
That's quite amazing. All right, so actually, this episode is timely because I wanted to discuss with you, right, the state of startups and innovation in Luxembourg, your new initiative, Startups.lu, right, and the things, the projects, the initiatives that are needed to get to a healthy ecosystem, because it's good to say, well, we have 500 startups and then tomorrow we have, or the day after tomorrow we have 1,000, but we need to have like a healthy ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that in your capacity as an entrepreneur and a builder, and now someone that wants to federate and help the ecosystem, you have ideas for what we may want to do, both for the private sector and the public sector. So tell us a little bit about, those initiatives that are needed, that you think are needed, and those things that you're going to work via Startups.lu.
Okay. Well, first, maybe why did we launch Startups.lu and
sure.
Who's behind Startups.lu? There's actually 10 founders who are taking some of their time, investing some of their time, and want to give back to the ecosystem. So we've all very much enjoyed the support we get here in Luxembourg, which is incredible, which is structured, which is persistent, long-term investment by public players, ministries, and of course, a lot of things are already covered, but there's some things where we thought as founders we needed to give back, which is just sharing our experience. So that's something which you can see in other ecosystems which have grown to a critical mass much earlier, is that you have the second, third, fourth generation of digital founders and innovation founders. So innovation has been very much defined as research in the end of the 90s or early 2000s. There's a lot of spin-offs at the university, projects that are waiting to become the next generation of startups. There is, of course, also these homegrown or bootstrapped founders which we represent, and we go through the same challenges. So I'm very happy to have a board of 10 founders who are running their own companies. As some of them are more experienced because it's not the first one, and others are younger ones and really are connected to the challenges which you have if you are in your first project. And in the first survey that we've done, it turned out that 50% of the respondents were in their first venture. Okay, so statistically, investors and VCs will tell you that 2/3 will fail.
Yeah, I will tell you that.
and there is learning money which is being spent by those, but which has also been spent by people who succeeded. And we all have a plan, and then we get punched in the face. Said Muhammad Ali. So it never comes as you expect, and you always have challenges. Now, some of the challenges are just like tools which you require, which you need, legal questions. How do I recruit my first employee? What is a job contract like? What is an NDA? Once the team grows, how do you have an employee stock options plan? Well, some of us founders in Luxembourg from the community have managed to have solutions with virtual ESOPs.
Yeah, sure.
Now, still, when I meet some of the startups, I hear they're spending some money with lawyers trying to find out something which others have found out. So this sharing is very important, and that's one of the things which was not structured so far, which is one generation helping the next generation scale. So I think we're very good at bootstrapping in Luxembourg. There's a tremendous network of business angels, but very quickly you get to have your POC, your MVP running, and the Luxembourg testbed is really great for that. But obviously Luxembourg is not big enough for our ambitions as founders, and I'm speaking of all the founders. All founders have the ambition to conquer Europe or the world. Sure. Yeah. And that brings you to the next step, which is growing internationally. How do you grow internationally? And there are people who've done it and have had that experience, and that's a useful experience. And also to see who in the existing network can help you kickstart and get going that way. So there's certain things, certain tools which are required. There are also certain initiatives that could be taken by the public players, like, for example, stock options plans specifically for startups. There's some countries have implemented that already. Why not in Luxembourg? Like tax advantages for private people that invest in startups, just to make it more attractive to invest in startups. Belgians have a tax shelter. Luxembourg doesn't for the moment. So and we want to work closely with those players to find what are the best practices we can see in ecosystems which are thriving. There are ecosystems of small size which have become the reference, not to name them, internationally, and where we can draw some inspiration. And there are some also initiatives being taken in Europe which we can replicate within the boundaries and the limits of what the European fair play is meant to stay between states. We want to contribute and give our input from the founder's perspective. So that's what we do. And the more you scratch the surface, the more you find subjects which are relevant.
That makes sense. Before coming to Luxembourg, I lived in the US, right? I invested in startups in the US. And indeed, right, there are different ecosystems of innovation on the West Coast, on the East Coast, in between. And all these ecosystems have codified, simplified, programmatically, all kinds of best practices as well as tools. And all these are like very simple once they're codified, right? The founder gets to talk to mentors, gets to pick up literally off the internet 2 or 3 legal documents that are kind of like stock and understood by everyone. And apart from like finding the right co-founder and then thinking about your value proposition, everything else, right? Friction has been removed as much as possible, right? So from what I'm hearing from you, there's a lot of things in Luxembourg, but maybe coordinating, simplifying, and then adding certain things that don't exist, right?
Yes, exactly.
It's kind of like your V1 of startups at the LU.
Yes, and actually the launching your second or third startup in Luxembourg is way easier because you already have been through that process, which you had to find out yourself most of the time, and you start creating your network. But if you're a first-time founder or if you come from abroad and you want to settle to Luxembourg, you don't have that network.
Of course.
And so that's also something which we want to facilitate by sharing the networks that we have as founders, those who have done that before, been there, done that, and help them grow faster. So we really want to foster innovation and growth companies. We looked at the definition of startup. What is a startup? There's not one definition. There's just as many definitions as you want. And but we picked 2 elements which we thought are very relevant. The first is that it is an innovative and unproven business model. So it's something new. And the founder is not meant to stay alone. He does it for growth. Okay, so this growth perspective is important, and also this risking of trying something new. And Luxembourg is a superb place to get started. We have people from all over the world moving to Luxembourg because it's a friendly place. You have accelerators where you can participate without giving out shares with Fit for Start. We have a growing investor community. We have access to the CE mark and European markets. There are some verticals like Fintech, really well organized. Others are following. Space is taking off. It's impressive what is happening there. Digital health is coming. So there is some true means for infrastructure, for people to help, and taking out these little frictions. Is probably what is needed to even accelerate that.
I'm going to give you another example of what is a startup. A startup is a very young enterprise that doesn't know its market, that doesn't know its product, and that doesn't know its clients. And in the process of growing and becoming a little mature, it's going to try to solve and to know its market, to know its product or service, and to know its clients. And because of all of these unknowns, really an entrepreneur like risks a lot, right? Or a group of entrepreneurs. Because of all these unknowns, it is very important, I think, for an ecosystem to support entrepreneurs and remove that friction that we've discussed as much as possible, so that the entrepreneur or the entrepreneurial team focuses on what is very important, as opposed to all the rest, which should really be so simplified that you don't spend time on it.
Yeah. Well, if you look at it from from the ecosystem, the Luxembourg natives are not really that entrepreneurial. Due to history, they were told or taught to keep low profile because the invaders came. It was the French, Germans, the Spanish, the Austrians. Everybody came and went through. So they were just low profile. It's something still in the culture. But there's a lot of projects moving to Luxembourg. Sure. Because the ecosystem is interesting, and those have already fixed those 2 challenges that you mentioned.
Right, of course.
So we actually have a growing community of people that want to scale, and where the risk, there's already a certain de-risking in the projects, and that's something which I think is really interesting, because there's probably a higher chance in these companies to have future champions and big name employers for Luxembourg, and also role models for the younger generations, people that they can look up to and just say, wow, these guys, they launched this service and I want to do something else. And the new generation coming, they will just do things that nobody has dreamed of because it's the new options that they have.
So if I understand, your remit with Startups.lu is not only very young startups, but also those startups that are approaching the scale-up level of maturity.
Yes. Right. We have some fast maturing startups in the ecosystem. And they are coming to the step of getting international and moving, etc. So there's other people who have done it before, and there's other people in the ecosystem doing it before. Or just to give an example, for some of them, the mobile development is important. Well, sometimes there's just 5 projects or 10, 15, 20 projects around where mobile development is very important, but the mobile developers don't know each other. Right. Okay, but whereas they're exactly working on the same challenge.
Yeah, of course, of course. So you mentioned earlier in the conversation initiatives around tax incentives, right? And then we also discussed, best practices, simplification of documents for, formation of a startup, but also for employment, for stock option plans, for everything. And then you also mentioned best practices for growing outside of Luxembourg, right? Are there other initiatives that are important, maybe around education or other topics to kind of make sure that the health of the ecosystem is as optimized as possible?
Well, yes, of course, we want to increase or to see how we can contribute to increasing the share of female founders in Luxembourg. We want to create that link with the education, also just to have these startups being visible to students before they they have to do the choice on which university they're going to join or where they're going to study. Right. The subjects and the things happening in the ecosystem are not really that visible if you're not in the ecosystem.
That's one thing, right? I know that because we discussed this prior to our conversation. I believe that I have a startup, my fund, because it's a very young fund, and you differ on that. But suspend disbelief, right? When I came in, I knew that there were all kinds of resources, right, that could be made available to me when I started my business here in Luxembourg, but it was kind of difficult to coordinate and to find these resources. And I felt like I was kind of groping in the dark, going to one service provider, remembering that, there's this support from the government for certain incentives and so on and so forth. So having a roadmap and educating people on that roadmap as early as possible to kind of grow, tomorrow's entrepreneurs, I think is quite important.
Yeah. It's the fine tuning,
yeah, right.
Which we will work on, and then having some, based on our experience, and that's where I'm very happy to have this diversity in our group, to have first-time founders and recurring or multiple founders, and really to share again what are the challenges that first-time founders have today, and which have been solved by the older guys. Okay, so and I think that's where we can find the shortcuts, also find the right people to speak to in the administrations or the supporting initiatives, in the funding ecosystem also. So make sure and just draw the attention and repeat. Make sure you participate to that pitching event. Okay, so just sharing information on a different basis and allowing people to meet.
That was my part in coming to you, right? So now you're on the drive to recruit members for Startups.lu and kind of federate everyone and start various initiatives with all your members. But if you're not an entrepreneur with a startup, can you help? In what capacity can you help? Are you looking at other people like me, for example, an investor, angel investors also, but service providers to help? How can we get in on the train and work with you on that journey?
So we just had our launch event, and we highlighted that we have 3 different membership styles. First is active members. Those are really startups, bootstrapping or accelerating. Second is support members. There was a huge percentage of people there who are not startups themselves, but are interested in the ecosystem and want to give something to the ecosystem and support it. And the third is sponsors, which are very important too, because there's always expenses that need to be covered. And just to mention the support, we really want to work with work groups by thematics, which could be like, how do I arrange my funding, for example, but also could be also verticals, like space tech, so that the people in the space tech can work together. IT is also a big subject. How do I scale? How do I go to the cloud, etc.? How do I manage GDPR and sensitive data, etc.? So there's lots of subjects which will come up, and for sure we will rely on a network of independent people, bénévoles, who come and help us to to make things happen. And we're very happy to have had already expressions of interest of people showing up and say, hey, if I can give a helping hand, I'd be happy. And
all right, great. So if you're interested, right, the URL is
Startups.lu.
Startups. Don't forget the S. Startups.lu. And you'll get all the information that you need, and you can join as a member if you're have a startup, if you're an entrepreneur yourself, or as a supporting member, or as a sponsor, right, to help even more this initiative. Well, Patrick, thank you very much for having joined us. I look forward to helping in every which way that I can, Startups.lu, and I think it's well needed in the ecosystem.
Well, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it, and see you next time.